Work.
Yeah.
All right. Give it a couple more seconds and we'll go live here shortly. There we go. All right. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So the individual that I'm interviewing right now, it's funny because it's when I first met this man, the first thing that I really admired about him is that he had this tattoo on his arm, right? And it was it was a tattoo that we're going to talk about. I'm gonna let him explain it to you, but it pretty much says something along the lines that bacon is my favorite vegetable. Like that sets the stage
Amen.
for, for, for what we're talking about, right? So,
Yeah.
so giving him a nickname, my nickname for him is going to be the Culinary Boss, which kind of tells you what we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and what would you like to talk about today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show, essay. My name is Simon Zatyrka. I run a remote restaurant advisory firm called Culinary Mechanic.
Mm.
Um, the tattoo you're referring to is a pig on my arm, and I don't know, about 14 years ago, I said I really like bacon and I really like pork in general, so I wanted to do something that would kind of represent that. So it says, let's see, you're going down the line here. Bacon is my favorite vegetable. Pork fat rules. Unexplained bacon. What would you do for bacon? And most importantly, bacon, bacon, bacon.
Hmm.
A few pop culture references in there for kicks. Today I just wanted to come on and talk a little bit about, sort of the state of restaurants, the state
Hmm.
of the fact that, it's everywhere you turn, costs are going up. It's hard, it seems like it's harder and harder to find staff. And so for me personally, having been in the industry for, I don't know, 30 plus years, I look around and I go, well, yeah, costs are always going to go up, right? But there's ways that you can combat that by having good structure, by
Hmm.
really like treating your business like a business and not just trying to be creative every day, all day.
Hmm.
Balancing that out, but also like treating your people well so that it's not a thing where you're like having to hire because, oh, I'm always hiring. There's not enough staff. Well, how about this? Don't turn over your staff. Treat them like they are uh, a quality a number one asset to you,
Hmm.
and they stay. Retention becomes a non-issue, but some of that is leadership, some of that is changing some mindset
Hmm.
from I feel like there was a time when you could just look around and go, I need a cook. Oh, there you go. I need a dishwasher. Oh,
Hmm.
there you go. Well, that's not the time now.
Hmm.
The whole pandemic thing, it changed everything,
Yeah.
but also times have changed, right? You just can't get away with treating people the way you used to. And so um, with Culinary Mechanic, I teach systems, structure, and tools. Right? We implement that kind of stuff so that people are able to track their costs. But I also do a fair amount of leadership coaching, talking to people about how they treat people, how they want to be treated, how to delegate so that you can go home and have a life in
Hmm.
addition to running, pardon the expression, but a fucking awesome restaurant.
Hmm.
Right? Like
Yeah.
the whole goal is to run a restaurant like a well-oiled machine, right? So the inputs and the outputs coming and going.
Hmm. Hmm. So I want to take you like like on a time traveling adventure, right? I want you to kind of go back 30 years, right? So the year is 1994. You're working at the Hilton Hotel Resort and you're a line cook. Like I want you to think about that versus where you are right now. Kind of describe what kind of chef were you planning on being? Like, why did you get into food? Why did you even become a line cook? Like, what was your original thoughts before you are who you are right now?
Man, I mean, the honest truth is, even before 1994, when I first got into it, before I got into hotels, because that was like the first real like pro kitchen. I had a chef coat. We had those awful houndstooth check pants, right?
Mm,
But like before that, it was like, oh, I need a job. And then when I dropped out of college, I thought, God, I just love being in the kitchen. I love being around all the people and the food. To be in 1994, that was more about like, wow, there's just a whole new world to learn, right?
mm,
Learning structure, learning uh kitchens were fairly abusive back then. I was in, it's a pretty reputable place. It was a Hilton, but there was a lot of screaming and yelling, a lot of move your ass kind of stuff, you know. And so looking out at that, it was like, how do I get to the next level to be a little bit more organized like that guy? All of a sudden I saw chefs who were in nice fancy paper hats and
Mhm,
who had the nice chef coats and things, and it was like, okay, how do I get to do that? Because that seems like it's the next gradual step, right?
mhm,
And as I talked to my chefs and sous chefs that I worked for, as a cook, they just said, just keep learning, just keep learning, just keep learning. And so I did. Now you fast forward 30 years into the future, and I feel like for me it became a realization along the way that as important as food is and has always been to me, the people aspect of it really became this monumental thing,
mhm,
because at some point your own personal capacity for work maxes, right? You work in, unless you work in a super teeny tiny place where it's just one person and you're just going to go go go. You want to make more money, you tend to go to bigger places or fancier places, but they tend to get bigger in order to make more money. And that's kind of the ethos, right? More, more,
mhm,
more. So understanding that people need to be brought along for the ride. There needs to
mhm,
be consensus. There needs to be team building. They need to feel like they are a part of something. All becomes almost more important than what's on the plate, right?
mhm,
You can teach what goes on the plate, and you can teach a sense of taste, and if you taste everything every day, after a while you're gonna know, like, oh, I just added too much salt, man. Right? You're gonna know, oh, I overcooked that. But
mhm,
that's a skill it builds. And then obviously the people side, but it just needs to be so much. There needs to be an emphasis on how we treat each other, right? I think, and I'm sure that I can get up on a soapbox and have a rant about people treating people better
mhm.
in society, right?
Yeah.
But within restaurants, within kitchens, I think that um, I really push for remembering that we're humans,
Mhm,
remembering that we have this innate thing where we want to be a part of something. More often than not, people want to be led. So in this current day and age, I really focus on what it means to be a leader, what it means to be expanding your influence.
mhm,
Um, I had a young chef look at me not too long ago, and he goes, okay, leadership, that's cool, but what does that even mean? Like, what is
mhm,
leadership? And I that like, oh, all right, pause, right? So I stopped and I thought, what does it really like? What does leadership mean to me? And I realized it's the expansion of influence, truly
mhm,
nothing more, just expanding influence. And so, how can I, how can you, as somebody who's a veteran podcaster, how can you expand your influence aside from just the show?
mhm,
But that comes down to teaching, right? That comes down to teaching the things that are fundamental to what we're doing, whether it's podcasting or cooking, or I don't know, man, walking down the street, right? Like
yeah.
expanding influence through teaching, um, but also modeling how one would want to be taught. Because
Mhm,
I think that it's really easy to say, oh, do it like this, and this is how you do it. But I think more importantly, it becomes how this is how this is how we want to teach each other how to do it.
mhm,
And this is why. And I think that
mhm.
there's a little bit of why lost in the world, in my opinion.
So just think about it from this standpoint. I mean, obviously, like coming into it, and again, we're still on this time travel journey, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
coming out first, you were like a line cook, and then roughly like around 2000, you became a sous chef for the first time. But that's an evolution of skills and traits and techniques and strategies to move up the food chain. So, I want you to kind of think about that in comparison to what you just said. Do you think that there still should be like a hierarchy within that leadership? and somebody should follow? And I know that you're talking about people talking down to someone, but obviously, if someone makes a mistake, how would you then deal with that?
So yes, there needs to be a hierarchy. I mean,
Yeah.
there's almost no way around that. But I think that understanding, understanding that uh, rarely do people wake up in the morning and say, "I think I'll be apathetic,"
Mm,
right? Most people, and especially like, I mean, it exists for sure.
mm,
There's apathy, right? And I think that that has its own set of values, but when you get somebody who wakes up and says, "I'm going to go to work in a kitchen,"
mhm,
they're there to do the thing, right? They're there to work and learn. And I think that respecting that. And so, yes, absolutely. You got to have hierarchy. The evolution of cook into sous chef largely is oftentimes has been and can be simply that person is willing to do the work, is willing to learn the next thing. Some guys are happy to be the infantry soldier. Just they go in, they do it, and they go home. They go in, they do it, they go home.
mm,
The folks that rise tend to be the ones who are willing to do a little bit more, ask questions about why do we do that? Like, well, how do we get to the next, what is the next step? And oftentimes the next step is, being involved in ordering or hiring or filling out paperwork for new employees or, you know, receiving the product and making sure that it's perfect and just all the little quality control things that go into it.
mhm,
Um but I think that it's the desire to learn what's next. And for some, it's the desire to there's a desire to have more power, right? Or
mhm,
have more control. And I think that some of that comes from not having any. And I want to rise up because that looks cool to be the boss, right?
mhm,
Um, for some it is, some it isn't. Some people get into that position. I experienced a number of sous chefs who got into it and they're just like, well, this sucks. I'm working longer. I'm not actually making any more money because the first couple of years as a sous chef oftentimes isn't more money than the top end line cook because your salary now they kind of own you, you know. But honestly, I experienced that. My first year as sous chef, I made less money than I did as a lead line cook somewhere else. But
mm,
then, it's like you get a percentage raise, and then you hopefully you kick ass, and there's a bonus in it. And it just starts to go from there. I
mm.
never looked back after that.
Yeah.
Uh, just um, but it was the desire to learn more. For me, it was always the desire to learn
Mm,
more and learn more and learn more, and and ask questions about, well, wait, there's bonuses. How do I make the bonus? Well, the bonus is tied to your profitability. Well, that means you got to keep food costs down, you got to keep labor costs down, right? Like, so it just becomes more, it just more layers, you
mm,
know.
mm,
Um, I think for some, it's about going really high end fine dining. These guys and gals, they'll go to the nth degree. For me, it was more about like slightly bigger restaurants that had a little bit more pizzazz to them,
mm,
right? They're just busy, 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 busy.
mm.
Because you don't make money if it's slow. You don't make money if
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
that's business.
Yeah.
So
So I think it kind of goes back to like one of your favorite quotes. I mean, I think your favorite quote that I read, one of them was "Do or do not, there is no trying" from Yoda, right?
yeah,
So
buddy.
I want the listener to kind of really comprehend that because I mean, obviously you're saying that there's leadership, there's a hierarchy, there's learning and growing. So when you come across an individual that's not willing or they think that they're doing what they're really not doing, then then do you deal with that person? Because by default, that person probably gets cursed out, probably gets sent home. But in your refinement of leadership, how should someone deal with that individual?
That's an awesome question. I think it comes down to setting clear expectations,
Mm,
right? If somebody is if I'm expecting 4 and they're giving me 2.5, it's a pretty it starts as a very calm, casual conversation, right? And I think that it's about setting that expectation and then as a manager, as a leader, like truly carving time for that person to go and follow up so
Mm,
that tomorrow it's, hey man, we talked about that. Do you understand how that works? No, actually, chef, I don't understand how to do that. Sweet. Let me go back through it, right? Because sometimes it's training, sometimes it's desire to do it, right? And so it's for me, it's about understanding that people either they're if they're not meeting expectations, they don't know or they don't care.
mm,
So we gotta cross off don't know.
mm.
You know what I'm saying? So we got to
Yeah.
help them understand and give them all the information. And I personally find that if I say this is how you should do it and this is how it can get fucked up, right? So that
Mm,
they now know like this is how it's going to go sideways. And this is why we do it. This is why as a company or as a restaurant or as the chef that we decided or I decided that this is why we do this because if you cut the mushroom this way, it cooks this way,
mm,
whatever desired result is. But giving them some underlying information about like how that decision was arrived at, oftentimes for me, gives them the oh, okay, well that makes sense. I want to do it right. Because again, for me, people don't wake up in the morning and go, nah, I think I'll be mediocre today. People want to do a
mm,
good job, right? They want to achieve expectations oftentimes, and more often than not, they want to exceed them when they can, right?
mm,
But sometimes they don't know how. So for me, it's that. So now that follow up becomes okay. Now this is how. This is why. Do you understand? Yes, I do. Come back tomorrow because we haven't necessarily solved the issue, right? But so we're going to follow up again. And now it becomes, hey, we've now talked about this twice. What are the obstacles for you? Well, it's just easier if I do it this way. No, actually, that's not the way, right? Like if you're gonna work in this kitchen, if you're gonna work with us, we need
mm,
you to do it the way we've asked you to do it. Can you do that? Yes, I can. Are you sure? Yes, I am. Move forward. Tomorrow, another follow-up. Hey,
mm,
um, okay, that looks good. You feeling good about that? Yeah, it still takes me a little longer. That's okay. We're gonna need to, you'll get faster as you do that, but do that over and over.
mm,
The other side is I haven't, no, I really don't think I can do that. Hey, perhaps we should talk about whether this is the right fit for you because this is the
mm,
basic, right? It only gets harder from here. And if you're not able or willing, right? And that's okay with me. Like sometimes you get a cook in there and they're just like, yeah, I don't want to be the fine dining guy. I want to sling hash. Like sick, man. There's a diner down the road, right?
mm,
Or hey, chef, this is not nearly as fancy as I want to be. I want to be doing fine dining. Sweet. Then you should go find that, right? Leave like if this isn't the right fit for you, I will help you find the right fit because you worked
mm,
hard, but you aren't necessarily the right fit. So for me, that has extended over my career, that has extended a good amount of legacy, right? I have people
mm,
who I fired a guy and he's one of my like biggest supporters. He still calls me and goes, "Hey chef, I got a problem. Can you help me with it?" And that was 20 years ago,
mm,
right? Because I've always tried to give everything I've got to people and hopefully they feel it and see it and they give it back. But
mm,
yeah, I mean, I think if you go back to that quote, it's do or don't do. Like if you're here to do the
mm.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, like, when I was doing my due diligence and I was looking at it, I was trying to figure out like the overlap between you and your significant other, Ida Bell. And I was just kind of like she's really big into equity and social equality, but I hear that coming through to you. So I want you to kind of talk about the inner workings of your household. I mean, do you guys kind of like sit down and talk about some of the logistics of leadership? And does she piggyback and kind of point you in certain directions that you may not think of beforehand?
Yeah, there's some redirection. I'm not gonna lie.
Mm,
You
mm,
know, uh, I stand 5'10", 260 pounds. I'm a
mm,
big boy. I'm a big white man. I have Latino roots, right? Half of
mm,
my lineage is from Mexico. The other half is from the Ukraine. So I stand as a big male who's white, right? And so by that, there's all manner of preconceived notion, but there's
mm,
also a whole manner of things that are that are just they're just different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I go through the world, there's just certain things that are easy for me, and she points them out to me sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, is that necessarily the best way to take the person along for the ride, right? Are you treating that person with equally, but also with equity, and or with equity to do things
Mm-hmm.
right? My I think before we got together, my view was fairly narrow. I just did what I did, right? It was all about the food, it was all about the work, and now I've tried to incorporate the fact that I have a good amount of power and privilege from my mere presence. And
Mm-hmm.
so being mindful of that, right?
Yeah.
I also have a big voice, so I'm the loudest some bitch in the room. It's just for 25, 30 years, I've been like that is my role, right? When
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the kitchen, I'm the chef, and I was taught that the chef commanded the room, and so it was real easy for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm a big boy with a loud voice, right? But remembering to stop and listen
Mm-hmm.
to those around me and listen to other ideas and other points of view that
Mm-hmm.
happen to be from folks from all over the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just trying to take it all in.
Yeah, I definitely find it interesting because like the dynamic of households when it comes to like entrepreneurs, right? Usually you have one entrepreneur or maybe you have two entrepreneurs and they have two different schools of discipline, and you're saying that you're very loud. But correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Ida kind of outspoken as well? So like how does that symmetry really work with the both of you guys being entrepreneurs, both of you being outspoken? So when that hurdle comes and that friction comes as a leader, how do
Right.
you then deal with that with the internal issues at home?
I think that I've had to learn to, like I said, I've had to learn to listen a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very good at what I do at work, but there's a whole lot more to life than life in the kitchen. My
Mm-hmm.
joke has always been, oh man, I just cooked the chicken. I'm strapped to the stove, right? Like it's very simplistic. And so if I acknowledge that and I'm real clear about that, there's
Mm-hmm.
a ton more in the world outside the outside kitchens. And I need to be a student of it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so oftentimes I will defer to her on things like that. Um, but I've also like we also on the other side we have encountered situations where she's managing people and she'll be like, "What do you think about this?" Because you're the guy who manages managers,
Mm-hmm.
right? My last 10 years have been, overseeing 20 managers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who then each overseeing 20 to 30 people. So I think that we have developed a very over 22 years of marriage. We've developed a good understanding of each other's strengths, and we
Mm-hmm.
try to listen to each other, right? Like if there's, and then I mean, I don't, I honestly, we don't really fight. We
Mm-hmm.
talk, and that's our commitment to each other is that we talk through when we don't agree. It's like, well, why? What is the sticking point? And so
Mm-hmm.
we talk through it. Um, but yeah, we're both fairly outspoken and both, got a lot going on. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I could definitely see that. So, I mean, just talking about like food. I mean, obviously there's different types of food, which is obvious, right? There's different
right,
type of cooking styles, which is obvious. And if I had to pick you based upon a quote that you said, cooking over an open fire is the way. Like, so
it
I
is.
want you to kind of like talk about that. Like, why is that particularly the way versus you know, I mean, there's multiple other ways of cooking. You could bake, you can kind of saute, you can fry, all these other different styles of cooking. Why is char grilled like the way that you like to cook?
I think that there's a connection to
Mm,
for me there becomes a connection to fire, right?
mm,
You don't just turn the valve on, right? Where the auto pilot thing just poof, and
mm,
all of a sudden there's gas. It's it's about stacking. It's about stacking wood, and it's about giving yourself airflow, and then
mm,
you know and then getting that thing lit. And once you got it lit, it's about maintaining temperature.
mm,
And I think part of it is like char grilling, but also, I've worked in some places where we're actually like we're actually taking onions and wrapping them in foil,
mm,
like, like double wrapping them and then just tossing them into the fire and allowing just that intense amount of heat to cook, and really encapsulating, right? So all of that moisture just stays in there and you get this like ooey gooey, like soft, squishy onion that is just freaking amazing,
mm,
right? Then you can then puree and use for a sauce almost instantly. But I think the biggest thing for me with fire is keeps you engaged, right? There
mm,
is no point if you're cooking over fire where you're just you're just cooking a steak or cooking a piece of meat. You're also making sure, oh, the wind's shifting a little bit because
mm,
oftentimes I'm working over kind of open pits. Um, the wind's shifting. Hey, let's build this side of the fire up a little bit more. Or, gosh, that wood's really dry. I'm going to need
mm,
to make sure that we're at, staying on top of it, put a bigger piece on and kind of get the fire roaring. And you
mm,
can go back to the little pieces, and I think there's just an engaging interplay that I just absolutely love. There's just no way to recreate it for me. You
mm,
know, it becomes less about the fine techniques, and it becomes more about just the environment, all the external things, and allowing you to just focus on that.
mm, mm,
It's. I think that people who cook over open fire, um, I think it just requires an extra level of like care um, and involvement in every piece of the food, right?
mm,
And it doesn't have to be meat, right? Like there's nothing better in my opinion than like taking whole carrots and laying them out on the grill and letting them get charred, and then wrapping them in foil and letting them just steam up a little bit, but still over that open fire because it's just the flames licking up.
mm.
It's just special, man. It's
Yeah.
always been the way that I enjoy cooking. I wish I could do more of it. I wish I had more of a space on my property here up here in Seattle to be able to build like I have this dream of what I call a bathtub, and it would be like, I don't know, 8, 10 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, and at a good height of 36, 40 inches, where you just can have multiple grates and multiple like uh steel plates where you can have like a flat top kind of thing. They're crazy about their smash burgers on the Blackstone
Yep.
sort of thing. I want to do that over. I've done that over wood fire, and it's a little more work, but man, it's
Mm,
it's fun to be able to like, okay, we got all this great wood, let's get it going, and then
mm,
coals slide them over, and I don't know,
mm,
it's engaging for sure. It's just fun.
mm,
It's just another way
mm,
to really be involved in the food.
mm. So I mean, I think you kind of led into that without knowing the direction I was going next. Because I mean, obviously, the peak of food, like your skin complexion just changed. Like your face got completely rushed with blood. You got excited. Your heart rate was up. Your body started moving just talking about that food. So that's the height. But
Yeah.
there's the other side that's related to food and related to restaurants and cooking. And I'm going to talk about like Anthony Bourdain. 'Cause I think we both share like the love for him, right?
Yeah.
So on the dark side of things, it's going into like depression and you may not know how to cope with that. Now, obviously, what you just did was easily go to the grill, you light a fire, you put some food on it, it brings you out the dark place, but that's not always a solution. So, being that you're helping leaders lead and they're going into dark places at times, how do you then help them to kind of not end up like Anthony and stay more so where you just was very positive?
I think that this is a deep one, I say honestly, but the reality for me is that the quest for excellence and the quest for perfection
Mm-hmm,
can be unattainable. It can be this never-ending thing. And just that word, just those words right there, never ending, right?
mm-hmm,
When you go through something tough, often like the cliche is light at the end of the tunnel, right?
mm-hmm,
So if you can see the other side, you can go, oh, I can get through this much, right? But if perfection, if excellence is a never-ending struggle, that can wear on you after a while. So
mm-hmm,
what I tell people is you need to understand where you work best. You need
mm-hmm,
to understand what truly every day what your core function is.
mm,
If a chef is a manager, and if in general managers' jobs are to guard the business, right? Their job is to make the best possible decisions for that for that business.
mm,
Okay, that for me is like the core function. Never mind the cooking, never mind anything else. Your job is to make great decisions. Now,
mm,
if you understand, if you read a little bit, if you ask some questions, if you start to understand that working 14 hours, hours 9 through 14 do not yield the best decision-making capacity. It just,
mm,
I mean, you've worked hard in your life. You know you don't
mm.
make better decisions at hour 14 than you do at hour 7. There's just no
Yeah,
way.
100%.
So I teach people understand where your best decisions can be made. Make sure
Mm,
that you're scheduling yourself so that you're able to make your best decisions when you can, when you should,
mm,
right? So that if you're going to work 14 hours, that those maybe those last 3 hours are just cooking, doing the things that you love, right? So that you can make great decisions for the business,
mhm,
right? But also understanding that you probably don't do your best work at 13 and 14 hours. So let's figure out a way to get things delegated, pushed off your plate,
mm,
right? Teach you how to do that whole set expectations and follow up thing, right? So that the things can get off, so that you can make better decisions within the right kind of the right framework of time, so that you can actually go home and I don't know, play your video game or see your significant other or see your kid or go see that movie that you've been dying to see. The things
mm,
that bring you back to level, right?
mm,
Those are the things we have to be able to empower and enable,
mm,
right? And I think that for many, many chefs, they chase the unachievable and they think that more is more is more. And I was there. I promise you, 16, 17 years ago, I pushed, man. I pushed so hard. And I thought if I worked 80 hours a week, I
mm,
was going to get to whatever I was trying to get to.
mm,
What I came to realize was that if I dialed back from 90% effort or 99% effort back to 78, 80% total effort, I actually flowed better.
mm,
I woke up the next day and had more, like my first hour or two, I was way more productive than I was trying to be at hour 13,
mm,
right?
mm,
Not only do decision making capacities go down in hours like 9 through 14, but like your productivity it's just not the same. So I tell people like understand when you really need to be at work and
mm,
understand when you need when you say I should be going home at 7, bloody go home at 7,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like call it, right? And yes, there are days when you get stuck there an extra 2 hours, right? But I also think that it behooves any leader who wants to continue to be a leader and grow to take back some of that time when it's
Mm,
appropriate, right? There's going to be that Tuesday afternoon where nothing's going on, everybody's in place, everybody knows what they need to do. I'm going to go home an hour early and I'm going to whatever,
mm.
man. I'm
Yeah.
gonna do what I need to do to recharge my battery. Whether that's sit on a stump on the beach
Mm,
and watch the sunset, then that's great, right?
yeah.
Or just hey, I get for me it used to be like, oh gosh, I'm gonna get home an hour early. I think I'll go cook dinner and cook a slightly nicer dinner for my wife, right?
Mm,
And so those are the things. But I think that for me is the essence of it, right? Like you got
mm,
to find the things, but you also got to understand where you got to be self-aware enough to understand where you're performing best and where when it diminishes,
mm.
right? Because it does. It just does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you brought up a solid good point about like the dopamine hit, right? So it's kind of going to lead me into like your personal life a little bit more, a little bit deeper. But I can totally see you walking in the house and Sasha and Pablo come running and then you get your dopamine hit. So Sasha and Pablo is his two dogs.
Uh-huh.
So I want you to kind of like talk about that aspect of it. I mean, like you mentioned people's kids, but when I looked at the due diligence of who you are and your background, like you treat your dogs like they're your kids.
They are
So
my
it
children.
So is that a factor for you to then turn off? Do they help you turn off and recede from being the cook into being someone at home for that moment in time?
Yeah, I mean it's I definitely look forward to seeing the little jumpy body that's like, hi, how are you?
Yeah.
Like that's a wonderful feeling overall. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that there was a time in my life where I discounted it a little bit. I said I took it for granted, right? Like they're always going to be there. But as I've gotten a little older, I've realized, man, there's just something special about somebody, whether it's your
Mm-hmm.
significant other, in my case, my wife Idabel, and my dogs, that like having them be excited when I get home
Mm-hmm.
is an amazing, almost luxury, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it isn't something to be taken for granted. It's something special, and so um, it helped me. It has helped me in the last few years sort of almost plan my day around how do I get out, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
another aspect for me about like how do you stay in that good space? It's figuring out how you're going to make it so that you get to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Because some people who work too much will tell you, oh, I just couldn't leave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I think that it's all about how you interact with the work and how you interact with um, what you want out of it, right? If you will go into work every day and say, I it is important to me that I leave when I say I'm going to leave,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to take steps and you're going to have actions that start at hour 1 through hour 8, 9, or 10. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm for years I worked 10 hours a day minimum, right? And that was the standard, and that's fine. That's what it was. But I learned when you go to work and on hour 1 you are making decisions that will affect hour 10, it starts to get better. It doesn't mean that you're not invested. It means that you're invested in all pieces of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being as intentional about going home and taking joy and recharging from the at home
Mm-hmm.
when it's as important as the work, you start to take steps to do that, right? Because great chefs are great chefs because they employ an amazing skill set around the food. But if
Mm-hmm.
you add in another layer of complexity that says, I'm gonna prepare and deliver all this great food every
Mm-hmm.
day, and I'm going to take steps to stay organized and focused and get all my little loose ends that kick my ass, because they kick my ass every day. So if I pay attention, if I recognize the patterns,
Mm-hmm.
I am I can address some of those things instead of at hour 10 when I want to go home, right? When I want to go home and see my wife or see my dogs, right? So it becomes a very intentional exercise of the entire thing being part of work, right? Part of
Mm-hmm.
work is also going home.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that so many times we talk about work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, that word doesn't really fit with, like, balance doesn't always fit with work and life to me. I feel like it's more a harmony, right? If you're accustomed to working 14 hours and you love working 14
Mm-hmm.
hours and that leads to a good life at home for you, hell yeah, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if it's not, and then you have to find that everybody has to find their own level and their own harmony to it, is the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think on that side, we're talking about more so like the mentality and being able to turn off and check off once you get out. But there's another side to the health. And I know that, if Ida is listening, she specialized in public health at one time as well.
Yeah.
So I want you to really talk about like being that you're a cook and you're always eating what you want and eating damn good at it. Like most chefs tend to become a little bit more unhealthy because they're eating things that everyday people don't really have access to. So in that aspect of it, like how do you deal with like the potential high blood pressure, diabetes, and all these other things that come with eating really well all the time?
That's a work in progress, my friend. I'm not gonna lie. Transitioning from eating restaurant food and then
mm,
cooking at home, it's remembering that. I'm gonna back up half a step.
yeah,
I think the biggest thing that when it comes to people realizing why restaurant food tastes so good is in those kitchens, we don't follow a recipe for salt and pepper. We season to taste,
mm,
right? We season till it tastes correct to us. Similarly with fats, fat, whether it be great olive oil
mm,
or that amazing locally churned butter that gives you just this amazing creamy thing on the palate, butter of fats are our gateway to making things taste better,
mm,
right? So most people go, well, I don't understand how restaurant food tastes better. It's because we don't limit those,
mm,
right? We might say it's an 8 ounce steak, and we might say there needs to be 4 ounces of green beans, but we rarely, if ever, in the kitchen say, oh, it's
mm,
only a tablespoon of butter. No, it's butter in the pan. Get it hot, allow it to start to turn brown, put that piece of meat in or put those green beans in. And if you need a little bit of a liquid to kind of create that emulsion or a glaze around it, then
mm,
it's a little bit of liquid and a little bit more cold butter. And that's how you
mm,
get that glaze, right? And then you salt it and you pepper it to taste. So
mm,
transitioning from that, where there is no limit to it, right? And the only goal is to make it taste amazing, to cooking at home is well, you use better fats first of all for me, and then you know what I mean. Like, don't use as much, but use
yeah,
the things that taste good.
mm,
This is weird to some people, but I cook with 90% of the time I cook with extra virgin olive oil, right?
mm,
Because I've done my research and I know that that's one of those fats that's going to be a little bit more healthy when it comes to things, right? There's no trans fats, there's no bullshit in there, right?
mm,
I also tend to only use butter that from as local as possible. So if there's a local creamery, I'm going to use that. Um, and then just trying to be mindful that um, there needs to be multiple colors on the plate, right? Like I
mm,
want to have greens, I want to have those things, and it's a hard thing for me because if I'm left to my own devices, I will eat like meat, bread, and potatoes every
mm,
day. Like those are the things I love. So I got to force myself to like remember that, the big thing of power greens is a great way for me to incorporate
mm,
some good flavor, whether it be raw or sauteed. I love broccoli, so we try to eat broccoli probably 4 times a week. And sometimes
mm,
my wife looks at me and she goes, "Seriously, broccoli again?" Right?
mm,
So it's understanding like you gotta force yourself to do some of those
mm,
things because restaurant food isn't always balanced. It's not
yeah,
like
yeah,
we're not sitting there going, I think we need to make sure it's nutritionally balanced, right? Like
mm,
not how it goes, right?
yeah,
Especially if you start to look at classic foods from Europe. Oftentimes those things are like it's brown and beige all day long,
mm,
right?
yeah,
There aren't the colors. So for me, it's like, okay, do I have tomatoes in my diet? Do I have greens? Do I have, I love carrots. I can eat carrots every day, all day. So there's raw carrots, there's cooked carrots. They're there, but remembering that there's got to be some balance to it.
mm,
Um, I also love pasta. So I again, left to my own, I could probably eat pasta 5, 6 days a week to sort of balance things out a little bit.
mm,
Our personal current rule is pasta once a week,
okay,
right? And that's because if I sit down to a plate of pasta, I'm probably going to get seconds, and my belly is going to keep growing, right? Um, and as a side note, like paying attention to how I feel after I eat.
mm,
I hate to admit it, like when I eat pasta that's made from wheat, I don't feel great the next day.
mm,
Like I love it. I love the thing. I love how it feels going in my mouth. I love those flavors. I love those textures. But my stomach just it doesn't feel as good as if I eat, if I do like a poke bowl, man,
mm,
my body's happy.
mm,
Right. It's able to digest rice just a little bit better. When I
mm,
drink less beer, I feel better. And, if I drink more wine and less beer, I feel better. If I drink more beer, I there's just something to It's probably having to do with gluten and some
Yeah.
other things, but I hate that, right? But
Mhm.
the reality is you got to pay attention to what's happening with you, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So, so I mean, I think going to another statement that you made, right? I mean, you once referred to yourself as being a chatty motherfucker. So
Yes, I am.
I want you to talk about, is that the reason why that you got into podcasting, or did someone say you are a chatty motherfucker, you should become a podcaster? How did podcasting come into your equation?
Oh wow. I I think it's a mix. The answer to your question is
Mm,
yes. It's like this big resounding yes. Um, I think it's important to note that about 2 years ago I stepped away from operations. So I'd been in the
mm,
restaurant business at that point for 33 years. And so I was running helping to run 7 restaurants, and my daily personal interactions were easily over 100 different people in a day. I would
mm,
very commonly be in 2 or 3 restaurants every day, seeing literally hundreds of people. And so as I removed that and I began to do some consulting, and I'm doing a lot more consulting now virtually, very much like this online.
mm,
My number of interactions got to the point to single digits, right? Like I'm talking to my
mm,
wife, I'm talking to my 2 cute little dogs, and I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to
mm,
3 more
mm,
people today.
mm,
That's it. So I am a chatty motherfucker. There's just no 2 ways about it. I enjoy talking. I enjoy talking to people. So it became this thing of what's one way I can increase my interactions. I love the conversations that I've been having, very much like this.
mm,
On my podcast, I'm talking to largely chefs and hospitality entrepreneurs, and I'm been talking to some tech guys lately around things that they do for the restaurant industry. So it was that. I did have some people say to me right when I first left the restaurants, like you should do a podcast. You
mm,
come alive when you're talking about restaurants, and you have something about you that people have always followed.
mm,
So perhaps you should do a podcast. And I thought about it, and it took me, I don't know, year and a half, I don't know, 20 something months before I felt like I was ready and up in my brain
mm,
to start that journey. And so that's what it is. It's the ability to talk to more people. Hopefully the ability to um, expand my influence through some ideas that were hard won, right? Like,
mm,
30 something years in the restaurant industry. I'm good at what I do, and I want to help. I want to help other people kind of gain that proficiency and up their skill set. So
mm,
it's a combination of good things for me, but also
mm,
hopefully I can do some good for the world,
mm.
in the world that I
Yeah.
interact with.
So, like, I'll put you on the spot.
Okay.
So, besides you self-proclaiming to be a chatty motherfucker, if you could define yourself just using 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
Um,
Mm.
wow. I would have to say, um,
You're not being
obs-
too chatty right now.
no, I know, right? Like, I think observant,
Mm,
but blind.
mm,
Like my blind spots are massive sometimes, but I also pick up on things that other people don't pick up on. So that's
mm,
that's 2 words for you. Um, I definitely gregarious, uh, and thoughtful. Like I really try very hard to, and then I guess the last one would be like I'm proud of the fact that I've become pretty self-aware in
mm,
my 50s, right? Like I'm able to understand what hurts and what doesn't, what works and what doesn't. Um,
mm,
and I think maybe if there's a sixth word in there, it's perceptive,
mm,
right? Just I try real hard to absorb and observe and perceive what's in front of me.
mm. All right. So, like, let's just take off of that last word of being perceptive, right? And let's say there is a 20-year-old line cook listening to this podcast right now. They're thinking about opening up their own restaurant. They're trying to do the formalities and figure out all the nuances of it. But obviously, with that, they're going to hit thousands of hurdles in progressing forward. What words of wisdom would you have for that individual to help them to progress from being just a line cook into becoming the founder of a pristine, maybe even Michelin star based restaurant?
I would say for every moment spent on obsessing over food,
Mm,
spend half to three quarters of a moment on understanding the business of it.
mm,
Maybe even the same, maybe even sometimes I would say equal parts people and business,
mm,
right? Really understanding how the business works, right? Because great food, great service are really, they're an art and they can be common and you can even rise to these amazing levels. But you actually hit on one of my pet peeves in the world. It's
mm,
the Michelin starred restaurant. It's
mm,
the James Beard Award winning restaurants.
mm,
Which, if you don't, if you're listening to this out there and you don't know what that is, the James Beard Awards are the restaurant equivalent of the Oscars, right?
mm,
They are the awards for that industry. When you see a restaurant that has won all of this stuff, has gotten this acclaim, and they're doing great, and then they shut down 18 months later,
mm.
it is just
Yeah.
heart-wrenching, and it happens all the time. The attrition rate on new restaurants, even great restaurants that are just nailing the food, nailing the service, it's because people aren't taking into account all of the aspects of business. So
Mm,
my advice is if you obsess over food, spend at least an equal amount of time really understanding the business model that you desire to
mm,
employ, right? If you're going to be an expensive restaurant, really know what goes into that. Really ask a lot of questions and get some good input around what that business, the back end of that business model looks like.
mm,
And then the other leg of that three-legged stool for me is people.
mm,
Understand how to keep people engaged out of desire and pride and love of what they're doing,
mm,
not fear, because the fear only goes so far, right?
mm,
Like I can motivate you for an hour or two out of fear of losing your job, fear of whatever. But that doesn't get people to engage and say, wait, how do I not only do this correct today, but better tomorrow?
mm,
Right. So truly spending as much as we're taught in the restaurant industry, especially in the kitchen, that like everything's about the food, it's all about the technique, it's all about this. Yeah, that's great. Spend time, spend at least a modicum of time understanding what great interactions, what great leaders do to keep their people.
mm.
And that will make the food better,
Yeah.
right? Having good business practices the will allow you to get to do that great food, right?
Mm,
I've told chefs over the years, I'm like, if you don't pay attention to the business, you don't get to play in the kitchen. Just plain and simple. You don't get to have
yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah.
It
So
just
I think
doesn't.
you definitely dialed in on what you do. Like you're talking about retention, you're talking about leadership, right? So the next thing that I really want to kind of dial into is something that I'm also very passionate about, and that's kind of going into like growth strategies. So I'm going to throw something out there, and I want you to either correct it or add on to it, right? And it's
Yeah.
just going to be a random statement. Like if a restaurant is failing, obviously you're talking about being great to the people or making sure you have the right people in there, and that's kind of not only chef retention, employee retention, but also um, client retention, right?
Right.
And then obviously being able to juggle all that, you have to be a great leader. But let's say if your food is not, the margins are not set right. Let's say particular things that you're using and ingredients are really high premium, but you're not getting those back. Would it be safe to say by fixing that problem would help, but if you can't fix that problem, introducing liquor and having those margins and cover some of that cuisine, would that be a strategy that you would then help someone look at?
I think that you can aid it and it can bandage you for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're I'm a big habit guy, so if
Mm-hmm.
you're not in the habit of getting things priced correctly, you're going to continue to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that I think that yeah, you can definitely there's a little bit of room for error when you have a good cocktail program in place because the
Mm-hmm.
margins on that are amazing,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the reality though is if if you're not if you're not making the money that you should on the food side, there's
Mm-hmm.
probably not great structure and systems in place to ensure that things are bought and priced and handled correctly,
Mm-hmm.
which likely means that there's going to be there's potential waste, there's potential misuse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if that happens on one side, there's almost no reason why it doesn't happen on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be able to mask you might be able to mask
Mm-hmm.
that oh gosh, we're not getting enough for that prime steak, right? With some $15 cocktails. But at some point it's all going to rear its head when you realize bartenders are not they're not using a jigger to pour. There's no controls in place.
Mm-hmm.
In good inventories are not getting done. They're getting done way too late at night by one person who just really wants to get it done. And
Mm-hmm.
so at some point it's going to crumble, right?
Okay.
That for me is like
Mm.
great habits to get great habits.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Good solid structure and
Mm.
systems mean that there's a certain way to do things,
Okay.
right?
So let me throw another variable in there. Okay. Let's say you, like you said, $15 cocktails, the margins are looking good. The food, at least at the bare minimum, you're breaking even. And then you want to introduce a little bit more social engagement and conversions. So for a growth strategy, you introduce a rewards program. Where does that stand as far as what you're doing with your clients? Have you introduced that, or is that something that does not really work well in restaurants versus more or fast food chains?
I think it can. Um, I think that rewards programs can be good, but oftentimes rewards programs are the gateway to discounting.
Mm,
Okay. Discounting is a slippery slope. Giving discounts and and sometimes what you get is people only coming when you're giving discounts. Oh,
mm,
I'm not going to go until they do the BOGOs, right? The buy one get one free,
mm,
right? I've worked for chains over the years and every December they start handing out BOGO cards, right? So that they get people coming back in January
mm,
because that's when nobody comes.
mm,
Sometimes that works, but sometimes you just all of a sudden are busy as hell and you're not bringing in a lot of money because half
mm.
of it is sitting out there,
Yeah.
right? Sitting on the discount. So I think that rewards can be a thing, but it's I would I would say if it's about growth, the best marketing plan, the best growth plan is within the four walls that you
Mm,
occupy, and that is great food, great service, great beverage, right? Like if you're not sure if you feel like you're not quite on it, then make a plate to spec to the recipe every day.
mm,
Have the team taste it and say, this is what a perfect fettuccine Alfredo is.
mm,
This is why it's amazing. This is where it goes wrong. Does that make sense to you? Yes, it does. Thank you, chef.
mm,
Now the cook knows what perfect food looks and tastes like.
mm,
Conversely, in the front of the house, the server knows that that's what that perfect plate of pasta looks like. The
mm,
sauce should just pool this way. The mound of pasta should be in the center of the bowl, not sliding off, not sloppy.
mm,
And they should feel but also like quality control should be everybody's job, right? So that if a server says, "Hey, that plate's a little sloppy, chef, can we get that wiped?" the chef should not turn around and go, "That's my job, go away." Instead, they should go, "Yeah, no problem, thank you. You're helping to make us all money, right?" And so I think that making sure that everybody has great awareness of what the expectations are,
Hmm.
whether that be an open kitchen and nobody's at the host stand, the cook that's closest to that door should be able to look and go, "You know what? Someone will be right with you."
Hmm.
Right? So that everything that affects their livelihood is important,
Okay.
right?
Okay. So I think that that's a phenomenal answer. So I got another scenario, and this is the last one, right? And this one kind of plays into where we met, and I was, on stage talking about brand and brand babies and brand awareness. And from time to time, like this is kind of something that goes on in restaurants. They may have a brand partnership with a household name chef, like an Anthony Bourdain level, and then they'll co-brand that, or maybe it's like Cheetos, again, with like Taco Bell, like the co-branding of sorts. Is that a strategy that you've seen work, or is that usually something that the restaurant is dying and this is like the last ditch effort to kind of pull back to where they need to be?
I think it's a little different what I've seen, but what I've seen
Mm-hmm.
is when you start to partner with farms, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like so if I'm running a restaurant and I'm in Seattle and the local valley creameries are amazing, or there's local beef or local pork
Mm-hmm.
or whatever that is, or there's a farm down the road and they get all Blackfoot chickens. Like I want to bring that. Like I want to bring Jerry's Farms Blackfoot chicken so that
Mm-hmm.
there's a story because I feel like within food and within restaurants, stories are definitely a way to convey who you are and what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
So the co-branding with kind of going backward rather like less processed co-branding is way more important to me, right? I love knowing that like this chicken got to run around 5 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
in its little mini pasture and it was treated humanely. That's important to a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you've got the price point of a restaurant that can do that, great. Like I said, I spent the last 10 years working for a company and we were proud of the fact that we weren't able to do that level of product, but we were able to say that all of our beef, all of our pork, and all of our chicken were coming from Washington State. And that's as local as we could be. That's as specific as we could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the price point because it's only a $16 taco, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not a $54 taco
Yeah.
because people just aren't buying $54 tacos. But so
Yeah.
I think that the answer to your question is there's definitely um, a way to do that within restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I don't have a lot of personal experience with like co-branding to a like you mentioned Cheetos and Taco Bell.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you might call like in a bar you might be specific about what whiskey is being poured in that Manhattan for sure, right? And there's the ability to co-brand and also get a premium price for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So, I mean, obviously, that we touched on like your core principles of retention, leadership, and growth strategy. So, someone is listening right now. They're planning on opening a restaurant, or they have a restaurant open, or they're working with chefs. How do they get in contact with you for you to be able to help them?
I mean, the easiest way is through my website. So that's www.culinarymechanic.com.
Mm,
And there's a contact page on there. I am all over LinkedIn. My presence is slowly growing on Instagram, and my name is Simon Zatyrka, and that is Zatyrka. Um, I feel like I wish I was given Smith as a last name some days, but that's okay.
yeah.
Um, Culinary Mechanic will bring up most everything in a search on Google.
Mm,
I'm blessed with figuring out how to get myself to come to the top
mm,
without spending a ton on SEO.
mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
knock on wood.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, with that, I mean, obviously, you brought up SEO. We talked about marketing. We talked about branding. We talked about all these different things that kind of goes into restaurant business that most people don't think about. I want you to kind of talk about like, is there a particular book that you've read or you're reading now that you would like to recommend in that space that helps someone with the restaurant business?
Uh, yeah, I would say the book that I've read most recently
Mm,
was Unreasonable Hospitality by a guy named Will
mm,
Jadara. And it's really focused on super high-end fine dining, but his sort of relatability to
mm,
what hospitality is, even as much as people selling cars, and
mm,
it's just it's a refreshing take on kind of how to run a business and how to take care of your fellow humans at the same time.
mm, mm,
And that's I just finished reading that, and I
mm.
honestly I think I'm gonna go back and read it again because
Yeah.
I'm a slow reader, so a book takes me weeks.
Mm,
My wife swallows things in like
mm.
10 hours.
That's crazy. So I'm thinking about I think this is a question that I don't know what direction you're gonna go in because obviously it could be food related, but it could be something totally else because you're more than just food, right? But if you had an opportunity to spend 24 hours with anyone, right? It could have been someone in your past, someone that potentially you always wanted to meet that you never met, someone that's dead, someone that's still alive, but you have an opportunity to spend 24 hours with this person, right? Who would it be and why? And you cannot say Ida.
Oh, gosh. Um, you know, it sounds a little kitschy, but I'm in a tie between John Lee Hooker and Julia Child.
Mm,
And I'll tell you why. Throughout my life, what I've learned more than anything is I am in love with the intentionality of craft, right? I love it when somebody is great at
mm,
what they do. There is nothing that makes me happier than seeing somebody that is at ease with their instrument, whether that's a guitar,
mhm,
whether that's any number of musical instruments. Like I love seeing a guitarist that is like in the zone. I love watching a cook who loves what they're doing and feels what's happening, right? Like I
mm,
love standing on the side of a kitchen and watching a saute cook who's got 5 or 6 pans rolling. Like somebody who is in love with their craft and really, really excelling at it. So both of those people for me are like
mm.
the essence of the intentionality of craft, like doing something you do really well,
Yeah.
right? Um, I and I'll even throw this right back at you because when I first met you, I was in
Mm,
awe of the command with which
mm,
you understood branding. It
mm,
was very clear to me that this is something that you were passionate about. You'd spent lots of time understanding, learning, and absorbing so that you could share it with other people. That to
mm,
me is like the essence of what is great in the
mm. So let me flip it back on you because I mean I think one of the things that I found profound in you was like the way that you talked about food, the way that you embrace food. It wasn't the typical about it being savory or being salty. It was a deeper passion than that. So as far as accomplishments, and if you have dozens of them, if you can pick which one would be your pinnacle accomplishment out of everything you've done in the food industry, which one would that be?
world. This is an interesting one. My greatest accomplishments are
Mm,
the chefs and cooks that I've taught.
mm,
The ones that come back to me and say, you know, there was that dish or there was that day where things were going sideways and things were rough, and it didn't matter because you were calm and you were cool and
mm,
you led us through the fire and we came out the other side and
mm,
everything was okay. And then you slapped everybody on the back and you rallied us through. So for me, it's always been like trying to influence people to be
mm,
better about them the way they interact. So
mm,
my greatest accomplishments are the I don't know if I necessarily call them students, but to some extent, yeah. I mean the
mm,
fact that and I guess to further that, the greatest accomplishment is the relationships that I've formed with those people, right?
mm,
That they feel comfortable enough 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years later to call me and go, hey man, what's going on? Hey, I don't know how to deal with this, and you're the first person I thought of. Or
mm,
hey, you made that avocado and crab dish one day for a special. Can you tell me how to do that? Because I have a friend who did that. He's a private chef. He calls me up and he goes, "Can you tell me how to do that dish? Because that was amazing."
mm,
And that those are my greatest accomplishments. I think
mm,
that the food is a byproduct of that.
mm, mm. I mean, it makes sense. That's why you do what you do. I mean, obviously, you're more so about spreading the wealth of information versus just creating a wonderful, great meal. So, for shits and giggles, right? And I know you've had to do this at least once. If I had Sasha and Pablo here right now, and I was to ask them which one of your dishes is their favorite dish, which one would they say?
Ooh, I don't know, man. I mean, their favorite dish or my favorite dish. I
Mm,
mean, oh, you know, almost anything with meatballs.
mm,
I'm a connoisseur of a great meatball, and I don't care
mm,
what ethnicity you're talking about.
mm,
A good piece of a good bit of ground meat that has been formed and cooked just so the texture is great.
mm,
I love, like, it could be a meatball sandwich, it could be spaghetti
mm,
and meatballs, it could be dumplings, right? Where that little bit of juicy pork is inside that
mm,
the wonton or the dumpling. Any form of meatball,
mm.
that's my favorite.
So, do you have a size preference? Because I mean, obviously, a meatball could be as heavy as a pound, or it could be as light as an ounce. So, like, what size are you in as far as your favorite meatballs?
I would say my maximum size is about
Mm,
2.5 ounces.
okay,
So golf
so
ball,
decent size. Yeah, yeah,
golf
decent
ball.
size. Yeah.
Um, and about 2/3 of that. So
Mm,
like ounce and a half is like
mm.
perfection.
A mouthful, a solid mouthful.
Totally.
Gotcha.
Something that you can pick up with two fingers
Mm,
and bite half, look
mm.
at it, and then eat the rest.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So going into closing, man, of Boss Uncaged, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to become the host of the show. You're a fellow podcaster, so this should be natural to you. Boss Uncaged is officially yours, and I'm officially your guest. Do you have any questions for me?
Uh, yeah. What's your favorite part about podcasting?
For me, it's twofold. I think on my intellectual side is being able to do the due diligence and to hold and retain all that information based upon what that person is saying and being able to bring it up at the right key point in time and then lead it into another topic. On the other side, it's more so the connections, being able to, I think you and I, we had a connection, we spoke, but after doing this podcast, our connection should be a little bit more deeper because we're talking about you and talking about things that you would not have just told me, but we're having an opportunity to kind of facilitate that information and
Right.
laugh about it and talk about it and at the same time give back a lot of value to our listeners.
That's awesome. I mean, I think that the exchange of ideas is one of the things that definitely fuels me,
Mm,
and kind of drew me to you when I first met you. I think that was pretty special, right? Just being able to understand, like, again, the what I describe as the intentionality of craft.
mm,
You know, um, I just want to thank you for having this platform, because
mm,
I've watched and listened to so many of your podcasts. So
mm,
I think that I it's really important to me to say thank you for creating this platform. Thank you for being thorough, right?
mm,
And that would be my biggest thing, is just having some gratitude for somebody who's really good at what
mm,
they do
mm.
and really works to continue to get better on a regular basis.
Well, I definitely appreciate it. And I think that the listeners are listening right now. I mean, obviously, first of all, I'm sure that everyone's probably hungry at this point. But besides the hunger aspect of it, I think you really dialed into some things that people don't really think about when they go out and have that Michelin star $300 plate thing. There's so much things that go into those plates. There's so many things that go into that restaurant. And it's more so like systems and strategies behind the scenes just for that plate to come out the same for that individual person every single time they show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why my company is called Culinary Mechanic,
Mm,
because it's under the hood, man. Right? It's the same way, like you look at a car and you go, well, how does it go fast? Well,
mm,
everything's got to be dialed and tuned and calibrated, and it's the same thing with restaurants,
yeah.
right? From the back of the house to the front of the house. The front of the house has a ton of timing and little things that have to happen for your experience to feel great, right? Whether it be in a diner all the way on up to that 2 and 3 Michelin star restaurant
Mm,
where they're crumbing the table without you ever knowing they're there, as well as receiving the tomatoes in the morning and making sure that they
mm,
are the peak of freshness and they're stored correctly and nobody's getting
mm,
sick and they're being
mm,
prepared, everything's being prepared. It's just there's so many little tiny systems and functions that have to happen
mm,
um, in order for you to have that, you know, to think of a factory, to think of a machine producing, right? Think of the Jetsons, right?
yeah.
The lady, she punches all the buttons and out come on the conveyor belt comes the food. It's the
Mm,
same. It's the same thing, only different, right? There's a
yeah.
lot of things that have to happen for all
Yeah.
of that to happen so that you get to have that plate of food.
Yeah. And I think you dialed in on a really good point. I mean, I think the best food is the food that is consistent. Like
Yeah,
if I can get the food on, let's say 2000, and I happen to fly back into that country 20 years later to that same exact restaurant, and that food is exactly the same quality, the same exact everything that I experienced the first time, I think like that's the epitome of being a chef is when you can dial in your food to be consistent over a long period of time.
absolutely. I mean, uh, you talk about 20 years. I think most chefs are happy if it's the same on Monday as it is on Saturday.
Yeah, there's
You know?
variables. There's a hundred different
Yeah,
variables.
yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't get like the type of pepper or a special type of mushroom, and you have to substitute. So there's all those different variables. But I mean, if you could be that consistent for that long,
Oh
like
yeah.
I think like that's when you should definitely get a Michelin star or be claimed to fame is the consistency.
Yeah.
Yep, yep,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I appreciate that, man. So I mean, with that, I mean, SA Grant.